Some men fire first and call it courage, others wait because they only ever need one shot. In Cinder Flats, they shoved an old bridgekeeper named Rowan to his knees on the planks of Devil's Span, pressed a revolver into the back of his skull, and made the whole town watch him obey. Then the man in the black preacher's coat stepped into lanternlight, smiled like mercy, and whistled 2 notes without thinking. Rowan's blood went ice cold, because those 2 notes were the last sound his son ever heard 20 years ago, the night Rowan wasn't home. And nobody on that bridge understood what they had just awakened. Devil's Span was not a place you crossed casually. It was a hanging bridge stitched between 2 cliffs like a scar that never healed. The canyon below swallowed sound and spat it back as echoes, so even a whisper felt like a warning. Wind lived there, constant and hungry, tugging at hats and tempers alike. On one side of the bridge sat Cinder Flats, a dry little town that survived on freight and stubbornness. On the other side sat the mine road and the long trail to the railhead, where money moved like blood. Whoever controlled Devil's Span controlled the town's pulse. For 7 years, that control belonged to a man named Gideon Sable, and he wore it the way some men wear a badge, with a straight back, a clean coat, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Gideon Sable called himself Reverend Sable, because a preacher's title opened doors faster than a gun. But the men who rode with him were not churchmen, they were the Ashridge Riders, a gang that never needed to rob a bank when they could simply tax everything that passed through. They blessed wagons with safe passage and cursed those who refused. Every barrel, every crate, every ounce of gold dust that crossed Devil's Span paid tribute. Those who complained learned the second use for rope. Cinder Flats had a marshal, of course. Every town had a marshal the way every saloon had a piano, something to make the place look civilized. Marshal Lyle Caro wore his star and tried to keep his hands from shaking. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, and the town told itself the same lie, because lies are easier to live with than graves. Rowan was not the marshal. He was not a rancher or a miner or a gambler. He was the man who kept the bridge alive. He checked the bolts every morning, greased the pulleys, replaced frayed rope, and hammered planks back into place when the wind tore them loose. He collected toll coins in a tin cup and wrote names in a book, because a crossing like Devil's Span had to be accounted for. To most of Cinder Flats, Rowan was just the old bridgekeeper, bent back, weathered hands, a beard gone white as ash. He walked with a slow limp that made him look older than he was. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was soft, like he didn't want to startle the world. That is why Sable's men picked him for tonight's lesson. Quiet men make easy examples. Quiet men don't fight back. Quiet men fold. They were wrong. Rowan was quiet because he had learned what noise costs. 20 years earlier, he had been a different man, a man whose name traveled ahead of him like thunder. Back then, the canyon had its own war, and Devil's Span was the throat of it. Men fought over silver roots, over stolen cattle, over pride, over whatever excuse they could feed to their hunger. In those days, Rowan had carried a rifle that never missed, and a reputation that made even violent men measure their breath before stepping too close. Some called him Bolt-Eye, because he could hit a moving target the size of a bridge bolt at distances that felt like lies. Others called him Noose Cutter, because once, when a gang tried to hang a rancher from the bridge, Rowan put a bullet through the rope from a ridge so far away nobody believed it until the man dropped alive. But that was 20 years ago, and Rowan had buried that man as deeply as a person can bury anything in the West. He had traded rifle oil for bridge grease. He had traded gun smoke for wind. He had traded legend for a slow, ordinary life. He believed ordinary would keep his family safe. He believed wrong. The night his son died, Rowan was across the canyon fixing a washout on the mine road. He had been gone one evening. He came back to find his home ransacked and his boy missing. He found boot prints and a torn shirt. He found a small smear of candle wax and a broken toy wheel. He followed the trail until it reached Devil's Span and vanished into the wind. At dawn, the town found the boy near the canyon edge, cold and still, and the only thing anyone remembered clearly was a detail that didn't make sense at the time. Someone said the killer had whistled 2 notes as he walked away, not a tune. Just 2 notes, sharp and casual, like a habit. Rowan heard that detail, and something in him split. He spent months hunting those notes across the territory, but notes don't leave tracks, and killers who hide behind new names rarely stand still long enough to be caught. The trail went cold. Time moved on. Rowan stayed, not because he forgave, because he didn't know what else to do when the world that made sense had burned away. Now the world was bringing the notes back to him, right here, right now, under a lantern that swung in canyon wind. Sable's men had grabbed Rowan at dusk as he finished tightening a chain near the bridge's winch post. They hit him once to make sure he understood who was in charge, then dragged him onto the planks. The town gathered without choosing to, people stepping out onto porches and balconies as if pulled by a string. Nobody wanted to watch, but nobody wanted to be the one who didn't. That is how fear works. It makes witnesses. Sable's men lined up on both ends of the bridge, rifles at the ready, turning Devil's Span into a corridor of threat. In the center, Rowan was forced to kneel, hands bound with rough rope that bit into old skin. A revolver pressed to his skull kept his spine straight. Marshal Caro stood near the town end of the bridge, half hidden behind a post, his mouth tight. He should have stopped this. He didn't. He told himself it wasn't time. Rowan didn't look at him. Rowan stared down at the planks, not in surrender, but in calculation. He listened to wind. He listened to boots. He listened to the creak of rope and the tap of metal against metal. He listened the way he always listened, because bridges tell you things if you shut up long enough to hear them. Then Gideon Sable arrived, and the bridge seemed to hold its breath. He walked onto the planks like a man stepping onto a stage, slow and assured. He wore a black coat with a white collar that suggested scripture and authority. A silver cross hung at his chest, catching lantern light. On his finger, a ring glinted, plain from a distance. Sable nodded at the crowd as if greeting a congregation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men like Sable build worlds where silence answers them first. He stopped in front of Rowan and crouched just enough to be seen as generous. He asked Rowan if the bridge would open tonight. Rowan said nothing. Sable smiled, turned slightly toward the crowd, and began to speak about duty and order, about how a town survives when everyone plays their part. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that could sell poison as medicine. He told them a gold wagon was coming through at midnight. He said the mine had finally agreed to pay tribute properly. He said the town would benefit from this arrangement, because a river of money flows best when it has one hand guiding it. Then he looked back down at Rowan and said the bridgekeeper's job was simple. Lower the chain. Turn the winch. Let the wagon pass. Rowan still didn't speak. Sable's smile tightened. He leaned closer and whistled 2 notes like an absent-minded habit used to fill silence. 2 notes. Sharp. Familiar. Wrong. Rowan's breath caught so subtly no one noticed. But inside, something old and furious rose from the ground like smoke. In his mind, he saw a small boy's face and a doorway that should have been safe. He saw a night he had not been there. He heard those 2 notes riding wind across 20 years. Rowan lifted his eyes slowly, not angry yet, not pleading, just certain. He studied Sable's face. the shape of his mouth, the way his eyes narrowed when he was displeased. He did not recognize the face. Faces change, names change, but habits don't. Then Sable's hand moved as he gestured, and the ring caught lanternlight fully. Rowan's gaze locked on it. The ring was not fancy. Just a band of pale metal with a small notch on the underside like it had been filed or chipped. Rowan knew that notch the way a man knows the shape of a scar on his own body. He had seen it once, long ago, pressed into his son's skin in the faint bruise pattern left behind. A detail that never left him. Rowan felt the canyon tilt for a second, like the world itself had to adjust to the weight of the truth. Sable straightened, satisfied with himself, and told Rowan it was time to be useful. He said if Rowan opened the bridge, the town would have peace. If he refused, the town would learn why refusal hurts everyone. He nodded toward the far end of the bridge. That was when Rowan saw the boy. A skinny kid, maybe 15, hands tied, shoved against the railing by two riders. The kid's name was Tobin Quell, the apprentice who helped Rowan replace planks and carry tools. Tobin's eyes were wide and wet with fear, but he tried not to cry, because boys learn fast in places like this that tears make cruel men happier. Sable called Tobin a volunteer. He said the town needed an example of what happens when old men hold on to pride. He said Rowan would open the bridge, or Tobin would go over the side. Rowan did not plead. He did not bargain. He did not explode. He only looked at Tobin, and Tobin saw something in Rowan's face that steadied him like a hand on a shoulder. Rowan turned back to Sable and spoke for the first time, his voice quiet enough that only the front row of fear could hear. He said Sable had gotten older. That was all. Sable blinked, not expecting words. He asked Rowan what he meant. Rowan said 20 years is a long time to keep whistling the same two notes. Sable's eyes narrowed. The riders around them shifted. Marshal Caro's hand tightened on his revolver, but he did not draw. Sable laughed softly and told Rowan he was tired of riddles. He said Rowan would open the bridge now. He motioned for one of his men to lift Rowan by the rope around his wrists. The man yanked, and Rowan's shoulder jerked painfully. Rowan's face did not change. Pain was just information. Rowan watched Sable's boots. Clean. Too clean. He watched the lantern swinging on its hook. He watched the wind, and in his pocket, pressed against old cloth, his thumb touched something small and familiar. A chipped bridge bolt. Not a bullet. Not a charm. A bolt he had found embedded in a plank after the Canyon War, kept as a reminder that the bridge always remembers violence, even when towns pretend they don't. Rowan's fingers curled around it, and he felt his decision click into place. Sable told him again to open the bridge. Rowan asked Sable one question, quiet and sharp. He asked where Sable had buried the boy's medal. Sable's smile froze for the first time, a fraction of a second too long. His eyes flicked away before coming back. In that flicker, Rowan saw the truth. Sable remembered. Sable had known all along whose bridge he was taxing. He had come back to build a kingdom on top of Rowan's grief. The realization did not make Rowan wild. It made him clear. Sable's face hardened. He stepped back and signaled. The gunman behind Rowan cocked the revolver and pressed it harder into Rowan's skull. The rider holding Tobin leaned him closer to the railing. Rowan exhaled slowly. Then he moved. He did not lunge at the gun. He did not swing at Sable. Rowan dropped his weight forward, using his knees to slide on the planks, and threw his bound wrists toward the bridge's center winch lever, the one that controlled the tension chains. The gun fired. The shot cracked into the air where Rowan's head had been a heartbeat before because Rowan wasn't trying to outrun the bullet. He was trying to control where it went. The recoil startled the gunman, and in that same instant, Rowan's rope-wrapped wrists slammed into the lever hard enough to jerk it down. Metal screamed. Chains snapped tight. The bridge shuddered like a living thing. The sudden tension yanked the support lines, and a hanging crate of toll lanterns swung wildly, smashing into the railing. Glass exploded. Oil sprayed. Flame licked up in a bright sheet as lanterns shattered. The bridge became chaos in a single breath. People screamed. Riders cursed. Horses on the town side reared against their hitch posts. Smoke rolled along the planks, thick and stinging, hiding movement. Rowan rolled into the smoke, low and fast, because smoke is a curtain if you know how to use it. A rider stumbled, blinded, and Rowan drove his shoulder into the man's thigh, taking him down. Rowan grabbed the man's dropped knife and cut the rope around his wrists with 2 quick sawing motions. He did not waste time fully freeing himself from danger. He freed himself from helplessness. Then he ran, not toward Sable, toward Tobin. Sable shouted orders through smoke. His men fired wild shots that hit nothing but wood and air. Rowan sprinted along the planks with a limp that disappeared when the old man inside him woke up. Wind tried to shove him sideways. He leaned into it. He reached Tobin as a rider raised a rifle butt to knock the boy unconscious before throwing him over. Rowan seized the rifle barrel with both hands and yanked it down, using the rider's momentum against him. The rifle butt slammed into the railing instead of Tobin's skull. Rowan kicked the rider's knee, and the man collapsed with a shout. Rowan cut Tobin's ropes. Tobin gasped, hands shaking. Rowan didn't tell him to run. He pointed to the bridge's side ladder that led down to the maintenance beam under the planks, a hidden walkway only Rowan and Tobin knew existed. Tobin stared, confused. Rowan grabbed Tobin's shoulders and spoke in the same calm voice he used when teaching the boy to tighten bolts. He told Tobin to get under the bridge and stay low. Tobin obeyed, scrambling down as bullets cracked overhead. Rowan turned back into the smoke. Sable's men were regrouping, trying to see, trying to find him. The bridge was long and narrow and unforgiving. That was exactly why Rowan had chosen it. Devil's Span was a trap for anyone who didn't understand it. Rowan understood every creak. Sable emerged from the smoke with his revolver drawn, face set in fury. His preacher calm had burned away, revealing the man underneath. He saw Rowan's eyes, and for the first time he looked uncertain. Rowan stepped into lanternlight for half a second, letting Sable see him clearly. Not as a bridge keeper, as something older. Rowan's shoulders were squared. His hands were steady. The wind tugged at his coat, and he stood like it couldn't move him. Sable leveled his revolver. Rowan didn't flinch. Rowan said Sable's whistle had been a mistake. Sable snarled that Rowan should have stayed broken. Rowan answered that broken men don't build bridges. Sable fired. Rowan dropped flat as the bullet whistled over him and struck a chain link with a bright spark. Rowan rolled, came up behind a support post, and grabbed the hanging toll cup chain. He yanked it hard, and the heavy tin cup swung like a pendulum, smashing into Sable's wrist. Sable cursed and stumbled back. It wasn't enough to stop him. It was enough to delay him. Delay is a weapon on a bridge. Rowan sprinted toward the town end, not fleeing, repositioning. He moved to the winch post where his tool chest sat, locked and weathered. A rider lunged at him with a knife. Rowan sidestepped, grabbed the man's forearm, and drove him into the post hard enough to knock the air out of him. Rowan took the knife. He didn't stab. He cut the rider's belt, and the man's gun holster dropped and tangled around his boots. The rider fell, furious and humiliated. Rowan stepped over him without looking back. Rowan yanked open the tool chest. Inside were bridge tools, wrenches, grease, spare bolts, a coil of rope, and beneath a false layer of canvas, something that did not belong to a bridge at all. A long case wrapped in oilcloth. Rowan hesitated for the briefest beat, as if his hand didn't want to remember the shape of what lay inside. Then he pulled it free and unwrapped it. The rifle was old but cared for, the kind with a heavy barrel and a simple sight, built for one purpose: certainty. Rowan hadn't carried it in 20 years. He had kept it hidden under the bridge because he believed if he put it far enough away from himself, it would stay asleep. He had been wrong. He slid a single cartridge into the chamber with hands that did not shake. On the town side, people were watching from doorways. Marshal Caro's face was pale. He saw the rifle and swallowed hard, because even if the town didn't know legends, lawmen know the shape of them. Caro stepped onto the bridge, revolver raised, and shouted for everyone to stop firing. His voice cracked. Sable laughed at him and told him to step aside. Caro did not. He stood there, small against the canyon, trying to be a marshal with no spine left to borrow. Sable turned his head and whistled 2 notes again, mocking now, and Caro flinched as if the sound itself had teeth. Rowan raised the rifle, not at Sable's chest, at the lantern hook above Sable's men. Rowan fired once. The hook shattered. The lantern dropped, bursting into flame on the planks, sending smoke rolling into their eyes. Men cursed, blinded again. Rowan didn't wait. He moved through the smoke like he belonged to it. Sable shouted for his men to push forward. They advanced, guns out, uncertain because bridges narrow bravery. Rowan fired again, not at flesh, at the bridge's chain pin above their heads. The pin snapped, and a heavy length of chain dropped, slamming across the planks with a clang that made men recoil. It wasn't lethal. It was terrifying. It turned the bridge into a maze of metal and smoke and falling shadows. Sable realized Rowan wasn't fighting like an old man. He was fighting like a man who had planned for this bridge his whole life. Sable stepped back toward the canyon side, searching for a clean angle. That was when Tobin reappeared, crawling along the maintenance beam under the planks, moving like a lizard in the dark. Tobin climbed up near Sable's flank and threw a handful of bridge grease toward Sable's boots. The grease splattered slick and black. Sable stepped, slipped, and caught himself on the railing. His ring flashed in lanternlight. Rowan saw it. He felt the old rage try to climb into his hands. He forced it down. Rage makes you waste shots. Rowan had never needed many shots. Sable steadied himself and reached for Tobin, grabbing the boy by the collar and yanking him up as a shield. Tobin gasped, feet scrabbling on planks. Sable pressed his revolver against Tobin's ribs and smiled at Rowan through smoke. He told Rowan to drop the rifle. He told Rowan to choose whether the bridge keeper would save his apprentice or satisfy his revenge. The town's breath stopped. Marshal Caro froze mid-step, horror on his face. Rowan's hands tightened on the rifle. The canyon wind howled through the cables like a warning siren. Tobin's eyes met Rowan's. The boy shook his head once, small and fierce. Don't become what he wants. Rowan recognized that look. He had seen it in his son's eyes once, long ago, when he had promised he would always come home. Rowan spoke softly, so softly Sable leaned in to hear. Rowan told Sable he had spent 20 years waiting for a moment like this, and Sable still didn't understand him. Sable scoffed and told Rowan to prove it. Rowan lowered the rifle, not dropping it, just lowering it enough to look like surrender. Sable's smile widened. Then Rowan did the last thing Sable expected. Rowan lifted the chipped bridge bolt from his pocket and flicked it into the air. It was small. It shouldn't have mattered. But it caught lantern light and spun, and every eye on Devil's Span tracked it because human beings can't resist bright motion in darkness. Sable's gaze followed the bolt for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Tobin moved. Tobin slammed his head back into Sable's nose and dropped his weight like a stone. Sable's grip loosened for half a breath. Tobin slid down, twisting free, collapsing low onto the planks. Rowan fired once. The bullet struck Sable's revolver, not his body, and knocked it spinning into the canyon, gone into blackness before the echo even finished. Sable stared at his empty hand, shocked, because men like him don't believe in being disarmed. He reached for another gun at his belt. Rowan fired again, this time into the belt buckle. The buckle snapped, the holster dropped, and the spare gun clattered across the planks. Sable's men froze, their leader suddenly ordinary. Marshal Caro found his voice and shouted for them to drop their weapons. Some did, stunned by the speed of the reversal. Others hesitated. Rowan lifted the rifle again, not threatening, simply present, and the hesitation melted. Weapons lowered, hands raised. The bridge had chosen its side. Sable backed up, breathing hard, fury boiling through his preacher disguise. He sneered that Rowan couldn't kill him in front of witnesses, not if Rowan wanted to pretend he was better. Rowan didn't answer with a speech. He answered with a truth. He told Sable he hadn't picked up the rifle to get revenge. He picked it up to end what Sable was doing to the town. Sable laughed bitterly and told Rowan those were the same thing. Rowan said no. Revenge is personal. Justice is final. Sable's eyes flicked to Tobin, then to the town, then to Marshal Caro. He was calculating, already looking for a crack. He saw one. He lunged toward the winch post, reaching for the lever that controlled the tension chains. If he could collapse the bridge or trap people mid-span, he could trade lives for escape. His hand slammed onto the lever. Rowan moved like a memory. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and drove the rifle stock into Sable's forearm. Sable screamed, grip breaking. Rowan twisted Sable's arm behind his back and shoved him to his knees, the same position Rowan had been forced into minutes earlier. Sable gasped, humiliated, and Rowan could have ended it right there. The canyon wind begged for it. The old rage begged for it. Rowan looked down at Sable's ring, the notch glinting, and felt 20 years try to drag him backward. Rowan didn't do it. He yanked the ring off Sable's finger and held it up in lantern light so the town could see. He asked, calmly, who among them remembered the Creed boy. A murmur moved through the crowd, uncertain at first, then heavier. People remembered. People always remember what they pretend to forget. Rowan said the killer whistled 2 notes. Sable's face twisted. Rowan whistled those 2 notes back, not as a habit, as an accusation. The sound cut through the canyon, and even the Ashridge riders looked unsettled, because some sounds carry history like a stink you can't wash off. Marshal Caro stepped forward, revolver still raised, and for the first time in years, his badge looked like it meant something. He ordered Sable bound and taken to the holding shed. Sable spat that no jail could hold him. Caro said maybe not, but a town can. Townsfolk, emboldened by the sight of Sable on his knees, surged onto the bridge. Men who had kept their heads down for years now grabbed ropes and tied wrists. Women who had swallowed fear now shouted orders. The Ashridge riders were disarmed one by one. Some fought, most didn't. The bridge itself had broken their spell. Tobin sat against the railing, breathing hard, hands shaking. Rowan crouched beside him and checked him quickly for injury the way he checked bridge cables. Methodical, gentle. Tobin's eyes were wide. He asked Rowan if it was true, if Rowan had really been Bolt-Eye Creed. Rowan didn't smile. He didn't deny it. He told Tobin legends are just men who ran out of places to hide. Tobin swallowed and looked down into the canyon where Sable's revolver had vanished. Tobin asked if Rowan was going to kill Sable. Rowan stared out into the dark for a moment. Then he said something that sounded like it belonged to the wind. He said he already killed enough men to know killing never brings back what's gone. Tobin nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of it. Sable was dragged away. Bound and furious, still trying to spit poison into the night. As they pulled him toward town, he turned his head and whistled the two notes again, weakly, as if the sound could still scare Rowan. Rowan watched him go without flinching. He had lived with those notes for 20 years. They couldn't own him anymore. Later, as the first pale hint of dawn crept over the canyon rim, Rowan walked alone back onto Devil's Span. The bridge was quiet now. Lanterns replaced, smoke gone, planks still scarred. Wind moved through the cables with a softer voice. Rowan stood where his son had been taken from the world and listened. He took the chipped bridge bolt from his pocket and turned it between his fingers. He thought of all the mornings he had tightened bolts and convinced himself routine could keep sorrow from moving. He thought of the night he wasn't home. He thought of how close he had come to letting rage write the ending. Marshal Caro approached carefully, like a man walking toward something sacred and dangerous. He told Rowan the riders were locked up, at least for now. He told Rowan the town would need help when Sable's allies came looking. Rowan nodded. He said the bridge could be defended if the town learned to defend itself. Caro asked Rowan if he would stay. Rowan looked at the town end of the bridge, where lights were coming on in windows, where people were moving with new purpose. He said he had stayed 20 years already. The question was whether the town would finally stand with him. Tobin limped out onto the bridge, carrying Rowan's tin toll cup. He held it out awkwardly, like an offering. Inside was a handful of coins people had tossed in during the chaos, not as toll, but as something else. A thank you. An apology. Tobin asked Rowan what to do with it. Rowan took one coin, only one, and pressed it into Tobin's palm. He told Tobin to keep it as a reminder that courage doesn't feel like shouting. Sometimes it feels like crawling under a bridge in the dark because someone needs you to. As dawn broke fully, Rowan walked back to his winch post and opened the tool chest. He wrapped the rifle again in oilcloth and set it back under the false canvas. He didn't do it like a man hiding a shame. He did it like a man putting away a storm, hoping it wouldn't be needed again. He closed the chest and locked it. Then he took Sable's ring, the notched band that had haunted him, and held it in his palm. For a moment his fingers tightened. Tempted to fling it into the canyon the way he had watched his son's childhood fall into darkness. Instead, he walked to the bridge's main support beam and hammered the ring onto a nail above the winch lever where everyone crossing would see it. Not as a trophy, as a warning. A reminder that evil can wear a collar and still stink like evil. Cinder Flats didn't become safe in one night. Towns never do. Wolves hear when a pack leader falls. Men with greed always come sniffing. But something had shifted on Devil's Span. The bridge no longer belonged to a preacher with a gang. It belonged to the town, and to an old man who had finally stopped letting two notes control his breath. And if you ever pass through Cinder Flats and you step onto Devil's Span, you might hear the wind sing through the cables and mistake it for whistling. Some folks will tell you the bridge is haunted. Some will tell you an old bridgekeeper snapped and turned into a killer. Most won't tell you anything at all because the West still respects silence. But the truth is simpler and heavier. That night, a town tried to break an old man in public. They tied him down. They put a gun to his head. They whistled the wrong two notes. And when the legend woke up, he didn't give them the ending they expected. So here's the question the canyon asks every man who crosses it. When the past finally corners you, will you feed it, or will you face it and choose something else?